the key to understanding your low energy, and it is not because of your low ferritin. When we're talking about fatigue, a lot of the time we can get hung up on that we have low ferritin and think that the low ferritin and the low iron storage is the reason why we don't have energy, and that it's just simply not how the body functions. We have to ask ourselves, how is energy made in the body? And it is made with copper and magnesium. That's what the body needs in order to make energy. When we're thinking of a low ferritin, there can be a few issues with that. Number one is I like to see a ferritin between 20 and 50, which is wildly against most of what you've probably ever heard before. And that's because that's not actually a reflection of iron stores in the body. Iron can be stored 10 times higher in your tissues than it is in your blood. So that means unless you're doing some kind of biopsy on your tissues, then you don't actually know how much iron is actually in the body. We're just looking at the blood and thinking that it's a reflection of what's in the body. We are constantly tired, we're struggling with fatigue, we're struggling with low energy, then part of the issue can be is that the body isn't actually able to turn what it needs to into energy. And that means that we need bioavailable copper. So we need things like copper and magnesium in order to do that. Part of the issue is we burn magnesium under stress. So if our iron is not moving properly through the body, so it's dysregulated, then that can be a really stressful event. The body is trying to get out of having oxidative stress, and it's trying to move things along. And that's hard to do if it doesn't have what iron needs to move. Iron moves with bioavailable copper. So that means that one, we need copper. Part of the issue is that our soil does not have the same concentration of copper that it used to. So if you are thinking back in history, back to say 1941, they had way more copper than we do in our soil. And there was a study from 1941 to 1991, and in Canada, copper was the most depleted at 76%. That is huge. 3/4 of the copper just not there. So where are we going to get copper from? How can copper be toxic if it isn't in our soil for it to get into us? And it's not coming from the copper IUD. That is not a source of bioavailable copper. That's also part of the problem because we're not getting the copper that we need. So it's not just a matter of getting copper, it's copper that we need in the body, and that's what used to be rich in soil. Iron also needs things like vitamin A in the form of retinol specifically, and a protein called ceruloplasmin that's made in your liver. If you're struggling with fatigue, there's a few things I want you to think of. Number one, if you're taking multivitamins or iron supplements or vitamin D supplements, zinc supplements, things like that, they can all disrupt how iron moves. So we want to go for whole food forms of things. Even if you're wanting to make sure that you're getting, say you have the MTHFR and you're really concerned about that, because it's a really frequent question that I get asked about, we actually want to make sure that we're getting whole food B vitamins, because in the bone marrow is the richest form of copper in the body, and that's where 46% of all of our copper is meant to be. That's actually a really rich source of B vitamins too. So if they're naturally occurring together, then that means to me that copper needs B vitamins and B vitamins need copper. And so when we are working on and we're worried about, say, the MTHFR, that's like a switch that can be turned on and off. So for example, if you're going for a walk and say there's a bear sleeping in the woods, do you have to know that a bear is sleeping in the woods in order to have a walk from point A to point B and for it to go well? No, you don't have to know. Is it nice to know that there's a bear there? Yeah, sure. But unless you're planning on going and poking that bear, then it is completely irrelevant as to whether or not the bear is sleeping or not, because you're not planning on going and disrupting it. You're not going to do anything to go out of your way to bug that bear. Well, iron is what bugs that bear. It's stress on the body. And so when we're thinking of ways that we want to minimize stress, we don't want to activate the MTHFR, we want to make sure that our body is able to create energy, then we want to focus on getting whole food forms of copper. So things like, for example, mushrooms are a great example. Beef liver can be one of the best ones. Things like that are really, really helpful for the body, but they are also rich in B vitamins. So it's not about getting the methylated version, it's about getting it in its whole food form so that the body can actually use it properly. So again, if I was struggling with energy, I would be looking at removing any kind of synthetic supplements from my regime. I would also be looking at adding in whole food supplements instead. So again, things like the beef liver is going to be really helpful because it has copper and it also has B vitamins. And the third thing that I would do if I was looking to create more energy is I would make sure that my eyes are exposed to morning sunlight, without sunglasses on, especially before 9 a.m. I'd be looking at maybe going for a walk. I'd be looking at connecting with the earth, maybe especially if you live in an area where you're able to go in ground and walk out in the soil. That would be huge, but really getting your eyes to have that morning sunlight can be really helpful. If you want to understand more about how iron's movement affects fatigue and affects our optimal health, then go ahead over to my bio and download my free ebook, which has a book on iron's movement, and I also have one on supplements that help iron move.